So, Andy, I would love to invite you on and you can tell us more about yourself. Andy Blacknell, great to see you.
Hey, thank you very much.
Andy, where are you
Bailey.
connecting from?
Sorry, where am I speaking from, did you say?
Yes.
Yeah, so Southeast London, when Jesus comes back, he's coming back in Southeast London. So I'm, live in Camberwell and going to church there. I'm actually going through the process of ordination at the moment. So I am in training at St. Mellitus College to be a prison chaplain, but I'm also a prison chaplain, kind of already doing the work of a prison chaplain in London. So
that's amazing, Andy. That's so good. I love the prison ministry and I love the work of the prisons, and especially in these challenging times such as COVID. I've heard about the work in Scotland, especially in the prisons around the Glasgow area, and how challenging it is, and especially with the older generation being in prisons. And I'm sure you're also encountering those challenges, but you're also seeing the fruit. You're seeing many people come to know Jesus, and even just people hearing about Jesus is a perfect opportunity. But Andy, I'm not going to take any more of your time. I am going to hand over to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Bailey. So yeah, I'm actually going to draw a little bit on my experience in prison, but also I've been part of the Gregory Centre for Church Growth and helped the Bishop of Islington and team run the church planting course, the plant course, for the last 10 years, and seen during that time well over 100 churches planted and worked with those teams to see that happen. So I also want to draw a little bit upon that experience, and particularly then over the last couple of years with all the challenges we've had in COVID, just reflect on that. So my task is really kind of thinking about, I might call it all-weather leadership. So over the last 2 years, we've just seen huge changes, huge pressures on anybody running any sort of organization, running any sort of ministry, running a church. And I've heard enough now from church leaders that over the last, as churches have started coming back, that we're seeing maybe 60 or 70% of people return. And although that might not be reflected in kind of money and giving, that is a source for concern. So I'm just going to share some. Let me bring up my slides. One sec. Here we go. So hopefully, and I was just reflecting on that passage about, building your house on the rock or on sand. And that really all that's happened over the last couple of years is we've seen stuff that's built on sand wiped away. So, things that really weren't on tremendously solid foundations, be they, actually, fellow believers, but who, have struggled to get back into church or back into fellowship, particular ministries, outreach. But yet at the same time, we've also, it's revealed to me some things that really have been built on the rock. And, in prison, particularly, it's quite surprising to see how people who live in, incredibly kind of broken, difficult situations with so little going for them, but how actually their lives, because they do know Jesus, because they have read their Bibles, they've seen how even amidst addiction, crime, and being locked up, how the word of God can feed them. That actually you see, what these guys, even without being able to meet in a church on Sunday, which is what's happening in prison, that their lives are built on a rock. So I want to talk a little bit about what it means to be a leader, and the three things that in my book, and I think in the Bible. I should say most of my career was as a consultant for a company called Willis Towers Watson, who are the largest employee research business in the world. And I'd argue the research we did around engagement at work and leadership at work supports the same three things that leaders do at any time. And as we're looking out at a world now where there has been this storm and stuff built on sand's been wiped away, I think our job's to look at, well, what's God doing and how do we build something new? after that. So I think leaders do three things. Okay, and you could say these are, at any one time they're doing them all the time together. You could say they're head, heart, hands. You could say they're thinking, kind of, leading, making stuff happen, and then relationships and growing people. I like to use the terminology here of map, navigate, and grow. And the map bit is like they do strategy. Leaders are always thinking about what's the big picture. So how do I change my plans at the moment in the light of what God's doing and what's going on? But then secondly, they navigate. They make progress. They're not just sitting still. They're not passive. They're looking at what do I do next? How do we move things on? How do we make something happen in this context? And then the last one is they grow people. They grow themselves. They're attentive to their own development, and they also grow people around them. And those three things, whatever you're doing, I would just encourage you to be thinking all the time about that. That's your focus as a leader. You're doing strategy, you're mapping, you're making progress, you're moving stuff on, you're agitating for change towards a vision in line with the values you've got, and then you're growing people, growing yourself, and you're attentive to your life. So I've got a model I'm going to share you under each of those. And first of all, I'm just going to look at mapping and the leader's map. And then with each one of these, or maybe just with the first two, then I'm just going to give you a few minutes to reflect by yourself on the questions in each of these maps, in each of these tools, rather. So just to take a context. And I'll do that as well, just to give you an example of how to do that. So first of all, mapping. And this is the tool we've used for the last 10 years on the plant course for every church plant to answer the 7 questions on this tool. And that's over the course of the entire plant course. What we say, you've got to be able to answer these 7 questions if you're going to plant and lead a church. I've used it with diocesan leadership teams. I've used it with charities, and I've used it in more commercial organizations. We sometimes call it a strategy on a page, a SOAP. But essentially, it enables you just in a series of questions to just look at where are you. But I really like the dynamic element of it, the yellow wiggly line, just acknowledging that this picture is always changing. And that's why I don't particularly use the word strategy, but do use the word map, because there you're just discovering more about the terrain all the time and learning more about your map. And it also just gets across, as we've seen with every church plant, if you journey with them a while, life's not a straight line. It's not like that arrow up the middle. It's much more like the yellow line. And the last 2 years have really taught us that. So if you're involved with a church, if you're involved with a charity, a social enterprise, think about these 7 questions. I'll talk you through them just in the context of my work in a London prison at the moment. And this has really helped me reflect on what's God calling me to do as a chaplain in that prison and with the team there. So, I'll start with the vision we've got inside that prison. And that is that when the men are inside, they're locked up but free. But when they come out of prison, they're free but locked up. And by that, we mean, that we want them to understand and learn and grow to be free, even though they're locked up in prison. So free to be all that Jesus wants them to be, free from addiction, free to discover who they are in God. But then when they get out, often that's when in prisons, people, once they're back out in society, there's a huge reoffending rate. So actually, once they come out, we want them to be free. Yes, obviously they can go be with whoever they want to be with, but actually we want them to choose to be locked up again. In a sense, we want them to choose to align themselves, tie themselves to Jesus, to the work of the Spirit in their life, and to deny the flesh and follow Jesus. So that's the vision. We want ex-offenders to play their part in transforming church and modern day Britain. But the current position so that's the vision at the top. But the current position, if you're in any way involved in a church at the moment, is anything but like that. I mean, most notably, because I'd say, unfortunately, in our prisons, it's more about punishment than it is about reform, and that's a really sad thing to be to see in prison, and also as a result of COVID at the moment, we've got prisoners locked up for, and have done for the last couple of years, for pretty much 23 hours a day, which is, as a Christian, I find that really pretty much unacceptable. And the current position is most people, I think, would say a lot of the people in our prisons are beyond the pale and don't deserve help. They are the modern day lepers. So as Christian, and Christians really respond to that when they hear that, and I bet a bunch of you listening to this now it will be stirring your spirits. So that's what we're seeing at the moment. Unfortunately, the institution, the kind of, I'm not having a go at government here, but the governors in prisons also, have got into the habit through lockdown of not really engaging with and not allowing a lot of other stuff to happen. So a lot of church activity, education and training, charitable work has just stopped. And I think we're stuck in that position at the moment. So, think about your current position, think about your vision, whatever church you're involved in, get some data around that. I'm not going to get from, we in prison are not going to get from that current position to the vision in one straight line. But the one thing that will guide and determine who I work with and how I get there and inform my decision are the values that we have. And we really push church plants, and I really push you to think about what are the values you have. Because if you've got the same values as people you're working with, you'll be able to stick with them. If it turns out you've got very different values, you'll end up falling apart and you won't continue to work with those folks. So, the values in the prison that I work in, I'm not allowed to, by the way, name the prison for security reasons, but the values are a long, high, wide, and deep. So deep, the work we've got to do to see men change in prison is a deep work, doesn't happen quickly. So it's a long-term game. You don't see change happen quickly in prison. It's wide, you've got to involve all sorts of people. It's a diverse crowd. And it's high, we aim high in prison for, to do things really well. We believe these men can make a massive difference in society. And actually the very kind of, often it was bravery and creativity that got them into prison, just directed in the wrong way. So we want to aim high if those skills can be applied outside of prison. And just as a by the by, if you want to have a look at a website called Onwards and Upwards, there's a part of that's a charity we've set up to help men when they come out start work, and we're looking at a bike repair business and bike selling business that men could come to, because jobs is a huge part of, and that's where one of the examples where we're really aiming high to give men great skills, start a great business when they get out. So those are the values. And of course, long, high, wide and deep is because really we only believe that those values can be executed. This change can happen with the long, high, wide and deep love of Jesus, that Jesus underpins all of what we're doing. So those are the values that guide us. And then we're looking at a bunch of risks and opportunities at the moment that shape what we're doing. I said the risk is it's a very risky place to work. And if you break rules in a prison, you can just end up not being allowed back in. And that can be quite scary. Also, the risk that the lockdown mentality persists, that's a big risk at the moment, that, just basically shutting everything down. But we are seeing a lot of opportunities at the moment. So the other, what's going to help us progress? The most amazing thing about prison has been We see an incredible number of volunteers offer to help and serve, loads of resources as well. Alpha, Sycamore Tree, the Bible Society, I mentioned up onwards and upwards. It's the area of my kind of ministry church life where for once I've never had to kind of go and get help. If anything, I'm overloaded with people offering to help in prison. So the opportunities and the signs is a thin place. If you've ever been in a prison, you will talk to people about Jesus effortlessly because people see the need. They know their own need, and they're very open to talk about that. So you've got to think about opportunities and risks. Then set some goals based on that vision. To try and define what might success look like. I haven't got too far yet because I'm still learning as a chaplain in kind of setting really measurable goals. But one I do have is to see at least one business established through onwards and upwards that can employ people as soon as they come through the gate. But other than that, I haven't set too many goals yet because I'm still kind of listening and learning. But what I have done though is, as I've answered those questions around what's the big aspiration with vision, what's my current position, what are the values that are guiding what we're doing, what risks and opportunities do we see? These are all questions I'll give you a few minutes to ask for yourself in a few minutes in whatever situation or context you're in, then set some goals. But all of that then comes down to, and I'll say here, Christians are then worst at the next steps bit, in my experience, church leaders. So we love talking about values, and I particularly saw this on the plant course. We love talking about vision. We love describing our current context in the current position, but then what are you actually going to do to try and make some progress towards that vision? What are you, what steps are you taking? I mentioned some of those for me around onwards and upwards. I'd also say our focus is around gathering and building team at the moment, and that would be something I would look for some measures for. But a real sign of progress we've seen that's been an interesting change, and I think this is happening in churches as well as in prisons, is as we've been unable to meet as church, I think there's been a much greater emphasis on small groups and on one-to-ones where people can be more accountable, they can share and be more open, where they can really say what's going on in their life, where we can be iron sharpening iron, and where you can really pray for somebody. And in a prison, actually, the men are very cautious about sharing too much in front of other prisoners. So being able to have one-to-ones and being able to get more volunteers in to enable one-to-ones has been, very effective in terms of ministry. So that, and as I look at church life as well, I think small groups and, which are in a way still church, I think is something God's doing through the pandemic, building those smaller teams, fellowship groups, where we share and do life together and can really be accountable with one another. And sometimes I think God's wiped away, in the sense it was built on sand, some of those bigger gatherings. I learned much. I mean, I thought Sundays were of value. I've been going into prison leading Sundays for a long time. But on Sundays, amusingly, that is the main time for, it's not amusing really, but it's the main time for dealing in a prison. So actually it's the place where drugs change hands, because men can meet across the wings, because it's a big group in the room with not many officers around. So I might think that's a fantastic time. We've got all these prisoners together, and a bunch of men singing some old hymns is really moving. But I do think it's one of those areas where actually Christians coming from the outside into church serving get very excited about that, but in reality, it's a little bit built on sand. So I might ask you, how does your Sunday look like that? Whereas actually getting into one-to-ones, getting into small groups, studying the Bible together, really talking about life, learning a bit about these men has been so different for me and more transformational for them rather than superficial. So I'm not saying there isn't a role for it, but that in terms of next steps, it's made us think much more about courses, about discipleship, about small group settings, about Bible studies on the wings, and bringing teams in who are committed to that sort of work. So with that, I'm just going to give you now 2 or 3 minutes just to reflect yourself and answer, just scribble down, really try and race through in your context the answers to those 7 questions to build your leaders map. For whatever, so pick a context. It could be your church, it could be a ministry you're leading, it could be an social enterprise you're involved with or you want to start, anything that you've got a kind of leadership role in. Answer these 7 questions, and it can be hard, but I'd really encourage you to do this and to get it down on paper. So I'm just I'll give you 3 minutes just to have a go at doing that, because I don't want you not to do it. Okay, so that's the kind of doing strategy bit, that's the thinking bit, and it may be one of the things, if we just look back at the 3 things I said, leaders are doing at all times. If the left hand bit is thinking, the middle bit is doing, and the right hand bit is relating, about relationships and growing people, then it might be good for you to think about, as a leader, which are you most comfortable with, because it's probably the one you overemphasize, and as you think about the people you work with, you might want to make sure that you're working with people who are more attentive to the other 2. So quite often I find, very clever people, head people who are head-led, really introverted people, do a lot of this first one of the mapping, thinking about what's going on. So now we'll move to the leader's helm. So this is the actually making sure you're making progress. You could characterize this as just leading change. So the difficult bit about, let's make sure we're making progress towards the vision. And in churches, I'll say a lot of the time, this is difficult. Churches are very resistant to change, and the longer they've been around, the great thing about church planting is they're new churches, so actually it's easier for them to lead change. They're more nimble. But if you're in a church that's been around a while, it can be quite resistant. So this is about making change happen, and that's the second thing leaders should be focused on. And there are 5 things that you're doing. You see the big picture, you choose the right direction, and in a way those 2 are driven by the exercise we just did on the leaders map. So there, I'm asking you to check, can you see the big picture? Can you get your strategy on a page? And that is something you do all the time. We know we don't just do strategy once a year as some sort of planning exercise. You're constantly revisiting those questions and making sure you are seeing the big picture and that you're heading in the right direction. But then I just want to move to get you thinking a little bit about, are you doing the right things? Are you checking progress? And then lastly, the be inspired bit drifts into the team stuff and about yourself and about growing others. But are you doing the right things, and are you checking progress? So doing the right things, I often think here that if you've ever looked at a timetable, if you've ever filled in a timetable for how you use your time during the week, and then analysed how much of your time is reactive, maybe productive, but maybe creative, but how much of it is really kind of transformative, how much of it is really about bringing your vision to life, making some sort of step change that will really help your vision happen. And whenever I've done that exercise myself or with teams, a lot of our time is taken up with productive, reactive activity, just responding to emails, kind of doing the job, and that's important. But, can you can you make sure that you have time cut out every day for prayer, for reflection, for being with people who challenge your thinking, so that kind of transformative calling we all have to transform our communities, to help people get to know Jesus, that we're actually prioritizing time for that, rather than being taken up with reactive, productive activity, which we've all got to get done, but can potentially squeeze out the kind of prayer and creative, transformative stuff that we're called to. So that's about doing the right things. So I'd encourage you to look back at the last couple of weeks, get your diary out and see how much in the last 2 weeks, how much time have you really been able to put into things that as you look forward to the next 2-5 years, the things that you really know will lead your vision to happen, will make your vision happen. So, for me, as I've made a significant change for ordination and to start working as a prison chaplain. It was God's hand to help me make all of that move. That move. But actually, what's really helped me do that, and it's taken a long time, was no longer being in a full-time job that just consumed all of my time, but having time to pray. Having time to be mentored and challenged by 1 or 2 friends, and then having time to be able to go into a prison on a more significant basis and start, thinking, cool, what could I do here? And it's been that so it's been the mentoring time with a couple of friends. And it's been, somebody involved in the prison drawing alongside me, challenging me. And then, that starting me down a discernment process. As I look ahead now I'd ask you, as you look ahead now for the next couple of years, what's the transformative time you need to protect in your diary? Who's it with? Where is it, that you need to make sure you are doing the right things? Sometimes that's doing, sometimes that could be reflecting and praying. Then the next one is check progress. So a lot of this, I'd say, is about measurement. I'm a big fan of, so if you want to, I said I'm going to set some goals for myself. You do want to check that you are making progress, moving in the direction you want to move in. I don't know if you saw Rick Warren's kind of legacy talk. I think he was interviewed by, I forget his name. Sorry, message me if you want to find out who this is. But he had a great talk where he talks about his legacy, and he got drawn into a discussion about measurement. And the risk is in measuring particularly churches and success in churches to check you are making progress, that we look at, and I don't think this is his phrase actually, but I'll give the measures he uses, but we're distracted by bums, budgets, buildings and buzz. And those are the wrong things to measure in a church. So, bums on seats. Have we got a great looking building? What's happening with the building? Budgets, what's the giving like? What's the money like? And then buzz, does it feel like stuff is happening here? And actually those really aren't helpful measures of progress in the church. And Rick Warren talks about 5 measures flowing from the Great Commission and the Great Commandment. They are loving God, so measuring worship, loving your neighbor, so measuring service, making disciples, measuring evangelism, teaching them, so discipleship, and then baptizing them. So, not always easy to measure those things. It's much more kind of organic And that's why I'd encourage you to listen to Warren, to Rick Warren being interviewed, talking to that. But we can measure number of people who give regularly as opposed to just our budget. You can measure the number of people doing courses or in home groups inside your church, so committed to something. Number of people doing Alpha, number of people being baptized. Those are more important measures of kind of maturity. And then he gives a great final measure of maturity for a church, which is that it reproduces. And he says he said that there's no church is mature if it hasn't had a baby. I thought that's a great measure for all of us, actually, that if you haven't multiplied what you're doing, then we're not yet mature, and that must be a measure of maturity for anything that we do. So just be thinking about, in your context, what are good measures? What are the measures you use to show progress? I think that is really, it's important to have measures that aren't just bums, budgets, buildings and buzz, that really do get to the Great Commission and the Great Commandment. I have always been a big fan of measuring baptisms as a sign of life in the church, so and adult baptisms especially, but kids baptisms as well, as infant baptism as well. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes there, just reflect on these five, and just be under those two. What measures would you use to check progress in your venture, in your calling? And then, are you doing the right things? So do you just look back at your calendar and think, do you have the time for creative thinking and transformative thinking, as opposed to just that productive, reactive activity? Have a quick spin back through your diary and see how much time you've been able to give to that.
Thank you so much, Andy. That was great. I'm sure the viewers, like myself, have got lots and lots of notes, and it's just refreshing to hear about your work and just the model that you use. So I've just got a couple of questions just off the back of what you last mentioned. What measures do you use in your ministry to, I guess, measure the progress of the people that you've encountered in the prison?
Yeah, so I mean, we would use baptism as we're working with one guy towards baptism at the moment. So those are the types of measures I think I'd look. So how many people have we baptized during the course of a year? I think we will also measure how many people have we been able to follow through the gate into a job. So who leaves the prison and goes into a job, and therefore, into a kind of a working environment, or how many people leave the prison into a church where we've directed them. So, and those are measures at the moment we don't have, and actually the system is, without going into it, you're not really allowed to be in touch with somebody on the inside and on the outside for security reasons. But we, as the chaplaincy, do have some flexibility around that. So I think I'd look at those measures. I think I'd also measure the extent to which offenders are leading and serving stuff in the church, in the prison. So, actually giving the talks, leading Bible studies, gathering men on the wings, as opposed to us doing that for them. But that's something where I think I'm really just starting out. I think I'll take the measures that we would use as a church, and adapt them for those same ones that Rick Warren uses of the Great Commandment and the Great Commission, and really try and come up with some measures from that.
That's great. Thank you. A leader once said to me, sometimes we see discipleship as getting someone from A to Z, but sometimes it's just about getting them from A to B. So do you see that a lot in the prison ministry, where you actually just wanting to take them from A to B step by step and then B to C?
Yes. So, I mean, sometimes you can kid yourself that somebody has. I mean, I did. You do have the most extraordinary conversations with people, and I did think I went to meet with somebody for the first time on SEG, which is the segregation unit, and they'd been in prison for 20 years. You're not in prison for 20 years unless you've done something pretty serious. And they asked for a book about forgiveness, and it was it was a really good conversation, and I thought, "God, that was amazing." And then I came to see him about 3 or 4 days later, and he had had an absolute revelation about forgiveness, and that he'd, that he'd hurt other people, and how, just that Jesus's death enabled him to be forgiven. It was really clear he'd had a revelation, and it was amazing. I don't know if he was a Christian before, but he'd absolutely kind of wolfed this book down in, and you can think in that moment, I've gone from A to P, or virtually A to Z. But a couple of days later, he also harmed himself pretty seriously. So I think that's what I'm saying. One of our values is deep, that the issues in these guys' lives are very deep. They don't, on the whole, get fixed overnight. But God is capable of, a leopard can change their spots. So we aim for that. We want to see that type of change, but it's we're going to see huge ups and downs. And that's where team is really helpful as well, to have the experience of other people looking in and saying, what are you seeing here? And I know one of the people I works with is always on kind of, very spiritually sensitive. What's the root cause of what's going on in that person's life? That's what we need to kind of address. If there's, and often that is about past hurts and, that are still damaging them now. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, it's, it is small steps.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andy. And that leads us perfectly for you to just talk us through your last slide, which you're saying the best to last. And I'm sure the viewers who are watching this too are curious to know more about you, team, and life. Yeah.
So this is the last thing, and I think actually, church leaders, I would say, are brilliant at this stuff. They're sensitive to other people. They aim to grow people around themselves. I'm not sure. So I'm not sure how good they always are at developing themselves. I think there's a tendency amongst every leader I've worked with that you grow, your big emphasis on self-development and being teachable until you're 30, 35, and then you think you can't learn anything more, or you've got nothing more to learn. You've kind of topped out at about 40, and you don't go on any more courses or reflect anymore. It's been fantastic for me actually going through ordination training at my age, which I can assure you is a lot more than 40, that I'm really being formed. It shocked me how much that's happened. So the last thing is be attentive to yourself, be teachable. What are you learning? I do think if you're not working on something specifically and growing in an area yourself, then you're not learning and developing. At anyone, based on feedback, that might mean you're not open to feedback, and it might mean you're not creating a culture of feedback and learning around you if you're not working on something at the moment based on feedback you've been given. So that's about you, but then it's also about team and attracting people, growing people around you. And I said I work for a company that did a lot of research on this. Two of the most important things that stay with me forever that I learned from that are drivers of engagement, of people's commitment and engagement at work. And this stuff is just as true in church. We know that people don't turn up or go the extra mile at work because of their pay, or because of a bonus, or because of some other type of carrot. So what do they? Why do they go the extra mile? The question that makes the biggest difference in terms of people's motivation at work is, my boss takes a genuine interest in me. That was the question in all the research, same all the way around the world, apart from, I think there might have been 1 or 2 countries where that wasn't the number one driver of questions. Of the 100 questions we regularly asked of about 1 million people every year in lots of different organizations, my boss takes a genuine interest in me. So that's one for you to reflect on in terms of, are you really connected to your team? And then the second thing I learned, taking a genuine interest in them, that's the big driver of people's engagement, is, can they see a career path? Are they learning and growing through what they're doing? And that's so can they see that they might progress to a different role? Are they getting feedback? Are they doing things that are helping them discover their vocation, to use that word? And if there is some way, by the way, you can measure how people are discovering their vocation in your organization or in your church, that is a great measure of real progress, of people becoming who they want to be. So I know Rick Warren talked about, they do that because they have a vocation course. So they just measure the number of people who've done that course and then completed a questionnaire at the end of it. You can all buy my book, by the way, and just get people to fill in the questionnaires in that and do that as a kind of Bible study. There's a study that goes with it, but something that helps people discover their vocation. And then within that, the kind of work-life balance, how are you and your team maintaining a balance between work and life? So, I'll have a quick look at it, but just be reflecting yourselves on those questions as to, how do people find a career path? How would they? Are you having those discussions with people? Do you have systems in place, regular touch points, so that you can have those discussions with your team?
Thank you so much, Andy. That was very informative and just insightful. Not Andy, Sally. John Maxwell always says that, like, before you can ask for a hand, touch someone's heart. So when you mentioned being connected to your team, can you give us some examples on what that could look like?
Yeah, so I think at the moment the most challenging part of that, I guess, so in the past that was always about having a regular, if you were all physically co-located, having that, both that kind of awful American expression, water cooler chat, where you are wandering around, you leave the door open, you're accessible. I would say, I was a partner in a consulting firm, and I knew I wasn't very accessible. Because I'm a little bit more introverted, and if I was really busy, I was definitely giving out vibes of not being very accessible. So I had to work hard at letting people know, what, you can come find me. Because once your first couple of really good performers resign, and you realise that really that process began about 6 months ago and they couldn't talk to you about it, it makes you think, how could I make sure they talked to me 6 months ago? Because it's really not I can't do anything about it now. So that is about regular touch points, quality time with the person where you're really focused, and then it's about the key questions. Where are you going? How are you doing? What are you learning? Are you happy? Do you enjoy what you do? Are you doing the things you're really good at? Does your job enable you to do what are the things you're really good at? Because we tend to enjoy the things we're really good at. And are you learning more about them? And do where do you think you'll be in 5 years' time? Really good kind of coaching questions. The interesting thing for everybody now is that a lot of this is happening over Zoom. And I'm very, very concerned about all this team stuff over Zoom, because I think we've lost those accidental interactions. So you have to be much, much more intentional about development on Zoom, especially as I think this kind of lifestyle of working at home suits people my age. But I'm going to make a guess, Bailey. I don't think it suits younger people, for which I might suggest your age. But where actually they need to be around other people and just see what they're doing and learn off them by that. So if you're in a kind of remote working context, you've got to be much more intentional about getting that interaction. And I would insist on days together where everybody comes together, and I'd insist on regular calls in which you're working through key questions about your development.
Oh, that's great, Andy. I like to be around people. I thrive around people, but I also love my own company. So it's a bit of an oxymoron when it comes to my working life and how I like to work. But myself and my team, we have regular touch points on Zoom. But we do try and have any excuse to meet face to face. And even something that we started in the lockdown was going for team walks. That since we're allowed to meet outside, let's go for a walk and let's just have a chat on what we're doing, what we're working on. But also it gave us the chance to actually be physically outdoors and it forced us to actually leave the house and walk a little bit further, because where we were meeting was quite central and we don't all live in central Glasgow. So it did force us to meet together and do long walks. So I think it is about being creative in how we meet and not just relying on screen time. Because as we saw a few weeks ago, when a few social media platforms went down, we were unable to do posts, we were unable to connect with the people that we like to connect with. And even as a team, we realized with one of our team members working internationally at the time, we couldn't even get a hold of him because the messaging facility was down. So I think as we're going forward in this new season, as you said, it is important about being creative. And I guess also knowing how your team love to be communicated with, because I don't mind text messages, but some members of my team prefer calls and face-to-face interaction. So how do you navigate that with your team about the different ways that they like to engage?
So I mean, it's very efficient doing, it's definitely enabled me to, stay in touch with and work with teams who are further afield, churches that, I'm not sure I could have done that piece of work without Zoom and everything we've learned over the last couple of years. But for key, like when the outcomes are being decided, we've still gone there and all got in a room together. And then with the team I work most closely with, a couple of colleagues, we go for a walk, once every, maybe it's once every couple of weeks. And it's not just about work, so we do on that walk, we talk about life. I mean, the Gallup, also do a lot of research around engagement at work. One of their 12 questions as a predictor of engagement at work is, I have a friend at work. Maybe we're getting better at forming friendships online. I'd still say you've got to meet somebody to really be their friend. So if you're not meeting people, then the chances are you're not as close to them as you think you are. Therefore, the risk is they leave.
That's great. Thank you so much, Andy. I've really enjoyed listening to you talk, and so have the viewers who've been listening to you, but they've not had any questions. But I'm sure they'll be able to connect with you. So why don't you tell us how people can connect with you and learn more from you?
So do email me, Andy at leadtheworklive.com. You can see that on the screen. The website also contains all the tools, all the graphics, images you can see. There are 50 odd tools in our book. I think they're great for learning about yourself as a leader. Some of them are kind of Lencioni stuff. So email me at andy@leadworklife.com. Visit our website. There's video material there as well as all the tools. I'm on LinkedIn, but I don't do any other social media. So connect with me in either of those places.
Andy Blacknell, thank you so much. We've thoroughly enjoyed that. And God bless you for your work in prison ministry.
Thank you very much, Bailey.
Thank you.
God bless everybody. Cheers. Bye.